Hey YouTube, so I wanted to make this video talking about my opinions on the Best Picture nominees for the Oscars for 2019. Those, of course, are Black Panther, BlacKkKlansman, Bohemian Rhapsody, The Favorite, Green Book, Roma, A Star is Born, and Vice, just in alphabetical order. That's the list that they have nominated. And I wanted to talk about my opinions on which movies I think got snubbed and the order that I think people should cast their ballots in. If you don't know how Oscar ballots actually work, they take the ballots that are given and you rank them from 1 to 8, and whatever is the lowest in terms of voting out of those 8, they remove the bottom one until one of the ones that's left has 50% of the vote left. It's not just a whatever is there is there. There's a really good video that DeFranco did dissecting the kind of process of the nominating committee and the Academy and how they do all the elections and everything. I'll link to that in the description down below. But I just wanted to talk about the order that I think the movies, if I were to cast a ballot at any point during this year, I think that my ballot would go in an order somewhat like this. So in terms of the movies that I think got snubbed, there are 4 that I have on my list that were big pictures that a lot of people tended to appreciate, that got a lot of critical acclaim as well as commercial acclaim. The first on my list was 8th Grade. So 8th Grade's a coming-of-age story directed by Bo Burnham, and I think it's one of those. Bo Burnham's a comedian, primarily, and his director's debut was kind of sheltered off to the side just because I think of who he was as a person and as an entertainer, and I don't believe that the movie itself got a lot of the acclaim that it should have garnered, especially since it wasn't really nominated for anything huge. I don't think any category from it, even though it was a really stellar film in my opinion. Second on my list is Sorry to Bother You, which was a really kind of art house film that I thought for sure would have at least made the list of nominees in terms of what the Oscars typically shoots for whenever they announce Best Picture. It had the political commentary that was really active. It had a lot of strong actors, and the cinematography of it was really solid. There's a lot of things that I think the movie did well that I would have expected to see it on the nominations list somewhere, but it again didn't show up, especially not for a Best Picture nominee. So those are the 2 of the art house films that I think could have possibly made the nominees list to fill out the max of 10 that they have. So moving on into a little bit more of the commercial blockbuster success, I think Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse was a really underrated movie. It did get nominated for Animated Film of the Year, but I honestly think it contends with the Best Film category as well, with all of the major ones that they have on the list currently. I think it was one of the most balanced in terms of superhero movies that we've seen, and especially if we have names and titles like Black Panther making the list, I do think that Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse could have also made that Best Film nominee list. And the second one that I would have put in terms of blockbusters that got snubbed would have been Mission Impossible Fallout. It was one of the best action movies that I've seen since John Wick back in 2014, I believe. And it's one of those that the name and the brand around it doesn't really garner any Oscar attention because it's very cut and dry in terms of what the style of the movie is going to be, but it was easily one of the best action films that I've seen of the year, and I definitely think it should have gotten at least a nod in some of the categories, if not Best Picture. So moving on to the lists of the ballots in the order that I would give them, I'm going to go from 8 to 1. This is no prediction or what I think is going to happen. This is just purely my opinion of which movies I enjoyed more, which ones I think have the most rewatchability, etc., etc. To start off the list at number 8, we have Vice. Vice was the biopic of Vice President Dick Cheney during the George W. Bush presidency. Before, during, and after, Christian Bale plays a really good role as Dick Cheney, especially with all the prosthetics and the makeup that they had to get done. It's also nominated as an Oscar for costume and design, I believe. And it's really solid kind of comedy-style biopic that cuts in between with a narrator who has a really interesting tie-in to the entire story. In terms of the movie itself, I thought it was really well paced. It just didn't seem like one of those that I could sit through multiple times. It was definitely a solid film to watch once. It was definitely something that I don't regret paying my money for, but I think that there are definitely other options, and I don't think it deserves to be anywhere higher than like 6 or 7 on anyone's list. So number 7 on my list is going to be a little bit controversial for a lot of people. It won the Golden Globe for Best Film and kind of surprise upset victory, Bohemian Rhapsody. I thought it was just in terms of movies, I thought it garnered a lot of attention just because of the nostalgia that it captured from the actual band, and it weighed a little bit more heavily on the band's clout than the actual narrative display of the film, and the way that the writer kind of danced around a lot of the aspects of Freddie Mercury's life and the band's life itself, kind of drove it in a little bit of a more popular kind of way, which shows in the way that it garners a lot of money, and it made a lot of I think its gross was somewhere around $1 billion, 900 million or something worldwide. It definitely speaks to a lot of people, and that's why it got to the point where it was. But in terms of critical acclaim, I thought it was a very above average movie, but not anything stellar that I would have put towards the top of my list for best film of the year. So for number 6 on my list, I have A Star Is Born, the Bradley Cooper directed with Lady Gaga. It was carried a little bit by the music in terms of the way that they wrote it, which for that kind of style of movie makes sense, but it was a little slow at times in terms of the build-up, and I thought that the narrative flow was really solid, but I didn't think that I saw anything special out of the movie itself outside of the music. Lady Gaga's getting more into the dramatic acting roles, which I think she's also nominated for her role. It was just one of those really solid, feel-good band movies that has a really kind of sad ending towards the back. The first half of the film was really good at building up an emotional connection to all the characters, and it's really positive and upbuilding, and then it has that kind of twist towards the end that we see after Bradley Cooper's character gets drawn back into the alcoholism that he struggled with throughout the entire movie, and it kind of causes his career and his wife's career to suffer. And it's a really good story, but it lacks originality for me in terms of the actual film itself. It's the 4th remake, but the music itself is the only thing that goes through any real change between the 4 films. For number 5 on my list, I put The Favorite. It's the timepiece comedy that stars Emma Stone and a couple of other actors. I think most of the main leading ladies or supporting actresses have nominations for their roles. It's a really solid and funny movie. It's a lot of dry humor. It's an art house comedy, so it's not really meant for the masses in terms of when you talk about comedy movies, such as the Will Ferrell or the Kevin Hart styles. There's a lot of good emotional connection that you get with all the characters, and there's a lot of good development that you see in each and every one of them. In terms of the film itself, it's shot really well. There are a lot of scenes and a lot of shots that I just audibly made a noise in the theater, just one of those quiet gasps that I'm just like, wow, that's a beautiful shot. It's really well done. I understand why it gets the nod from the Academy. It's one of those films that I think kind of settles into the art house genre really well, such as the Shape of Waters or the independent films. And I think this one was definitely on the list where it starts to be truly an enjoyable film for me. So for the 4th slot on my list, I have Green Book, which is the Viggo Mortensen and Mahershala Ali movie where Viggo Mortensen's character is coming into the terms with his racial bias and his a little bit of racist comments that he makes consistently throughout the movie. He's driving around Mahershala Ali's character, who is a doctor of music, and he performs all over the country. Viggo's character is hired as kind of like a driver and bodyguard to make sure, as he drives further and further into the South, that if there's anything that happens in terms of racial profiling or anything that has to do with violence can be handled accordingly and with swiftness and in a way that doesn't kind of tarnish the doctor's name. It's a really good story about a solid 2-person friend group story that ends on a really light and positive note. It's emotionally fulfilling. It has a lot of strong capability to perform in all of the categories it's nominated for. So interesting thing about this, I think it's one of the only ones that's strongly getting attacked by a whisper campaign against its nomination and against its bid for Film of the Year. I think it's a really solid movie. In my opinion, if it won, it wouldn't surprise me. If it lost, it wouldn't either, just because of that whisper campaign that's trying to go against it. But definitely something that if you didn't go see in theaters, it was one of those movies that I actually left with a really upbeat kind of feeling and a really strong sense of it wasn't a waste of my money in terms of the theater price, and I actually strongly enjoyed and took away a lot of good things out of that movie. 3rd on my list, I have Roma, the Netflix released movie from Alfonso Cuarón, and it's technically a foreign film. Most of it's spoken in Spanish, so there is kind of, I think, a little bit of a detachment for a lot of people in terms of Spanish not being a first language, and it kind of detracts from the connection that you get with a lot of the characters, but the story itself is one of the best, I think, of any of the 8 movies that are on there. It follows the maid of a kind of rich upper class house in Mexico as she struggles to come to terms with the pregnancy that she has, and the guy who got her pregnant leaves her, and there are a lot of other emotional heartstring tugs that consistently build up throughout the entire movie and kind of drag you through the mud with all of the characters that are going through the emotionally scarring and emotionally tearing parts that you get in this film. I think it's one of those really solid picks that would be in my favorites to win outside of just my own opinions. Most people have Netflix at this point. If you haven't watched that movie, I would go see it. Spend time, just set aside, try not to get distracted. I know there are a lot of people in my sphere who have tried to watch it and said that it was too slow for them to pay attention to, but it's definitely one of those that you have to be fully invested and sympathetic with the characters, and if you don't become sympathetic with the characters, you're not going to connect with the movie at all. It depends on the viewer being able to be drawn in. I don't think that the movie itself is the problem when it comes to getting that sympathy. I think it's a lot of people who are watching it on Netflix and doing other things at the same time who are slighting the movie for not being as good as a lot of people are claiming. For the number 2 spot, I have put Spike Lee's BlacKkKlansman, a racially charged film about the 2 buddy cop system that tries to take down a section of the Ku Klux Klan from the inside by posing as the Ron Stallworth character, where one does all the talking on the phone and the other does all of the in-person talking and interacting with. It's a really interesting kind of topic since it comes from a nonfiction kind of basis, and both actors do a really good job in terms of acting that out, as well as carrying out the vision that I think the director and the screenwriter has had for that movie. A lot of the political aspects that are cut out in the movie are fleshed out really well. I think draw attention to the fact that race is just something that is skin deep, and there are really funny moments where Ron Stallworth, quote unquote, is on the phone with David Duke, and David Duke's having a really nice conversation with him, and then at the end he says, "Oh, by the way, I'm a black guy," and just cuts to that thing where it's can't judge a book by its cover. That trope is a little overused, but it's really applicable to this movie, and I think it was one of the better ones of the year. So for my number 1 spot, I put Black Panther on there. This was the surprise of the season for a lot of people, having a superhero film that was so commercially successful get on the list for Best Film of the Year for the Oscars. The Academy typically likes to snub a lot of big budget films that do really important things for the film genres that they're pushing into the next year to kind of attract the younger audiences. Black Panther, for me, a lot of people thought Infinity War was a better movie than Black Panther. I wouldn't disagree with them, but I think that Infinity War has a lot of weight that's carried from the 10 years of Marvel movies that come before. Black Panther is the only one in the Marvel Cinematic Universe that showed up this year that stood on its own, that had really important messages to send, that did cinematography really well. The production design is stellar. The soundtrack is amazing. Almost every aspect of this film was amazing or near perfect, and it's one of those films that I don't think it's going to win just because of the fact that it was such a huge, big budget commercial success, but I do think that it was, in my opinion, the most enjoyable and best film of 2019. So, as a recap for what I've gone through, my ballot would look like, it would have Black Panther at 1, BlacKkKlansman at 2, Roma at 3, Green Book at 4, The Favorite at 5, A Star is Born at 6, Bohemian Rhapsody at 7, and Vice at 8. That would just be my opinionated order of what my ballot would look like. But if you have anything that kind of differs or any points that you think I didn't bring up about specific movies, be sure to leave them in the comments down below. I'd love to debate with anyone what movies they think got left off the nominee list, what movies I got out of order for what reasons, and anything else that comes to the Oscars. I may or may not do another video on the extended nominations list on what the actors and actresses, production design, etc., etc. I always do a list. I may put that list in the description, but outside of that, if there are any other things that you want to debate with me or think that I got wrong, make sure to leave it in the comments down below. I'll be trying to post more videos similar to this in terms of the Oscar recap before the Oscars actually show up, and I'm looking to push more and more into making my own personal videos like this more and more often. So if you're interested in anything else that I have to say, my opinions, or anything else that I may be covering in the future, do everything that you think is appropriate. You're on YouTube. I'm assuming you know how this works. Subscribe, like, etc., etc. Smash that like button. See you guys in the next video that I decide to make, whenever that may be.